Hello and welcome to AEF TV in association with Engerati. We're now joined by Mutale, who is the Chief Financial Officer for Copperbelt Energy. Firstly, welcome. Thank you for making the time to be with us today, taking time out of what is probably a busy schedule. So we were talking a little bit off air, and I'm quite glad you're here because you're a private utility from Zambia, and you're now looking at, okay, well, how can we take our expertise and invest in projects in other African countries? So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're finding with that to execute that strategy?
Thank you so much, and happy to join you here. I think as Copperbelt Energy, we made a decision a couple of years ago to diversify and try and play a bigger role in the energy sector across Africa, sub-Saharan Africa to be specific. And some of the issues that we actually found out is that there are very few well-structured projects across Africa for a variety of reasons. Whereas probably some of the East African states, such as Kenya, have got proven IPPs that have operated for a while, you don't quite find such projects, proven regulatory regimes for private sector participation in other jurisdictions.
So what's the what's the roadblock? If I'm going to be very simplistic about it, if you've got countries like Kenya where you've got an IPP structure, we hear about the South African IPP program. So it's been done. There are blueprints that exist. What's stopping those blueprints being deployed in other countries to give companies like yours the right framework to invest?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that we have is that you need the framework, the regulatory regime to underpin most of these investments. Now, most of the countries, yes, have recognized that there is a need to actually bring in the right framework which will allow for investments, particularly the regulatory regime. I think if you look at other countries such as Nigeria, they're trying quite well to try and attract investment and make sure that regulatory regime provides for sufficient return for private sector participation.
So does it all come down to that very simple thing, and it's again a narrative that came through AEF last year? Is it all driven by the regulatory regime? Everything else can actually fall into place quite quickly. That is the linchpin in the framework.
That's correct. I think for the power sector, the fact that most of these assets are monopolistic assets, you need to have some regulatory regime which will allow for fair play for all the participants. So if you don't have that or you lack that, then you need very, very strong contractual arrangements which should underpin your investments. In the absence of that, it becomes very difficult for you to convince lenders and equity participants.
So I get a sense that there is a frustration, and it's not just from yourselves, but other people who've sat in this chair in the past, going, look, we're ready, and why is this taking so long? And why do you think it's taking so long? Is it just one of those things that is going to take so long, or are there other issues?
I actually think that it's a very complex issue for a country, because you need to build up the right skills for you to implement it right. And then we also must not forget that the biggest issue which we have here is that we need the public sector, the politicians, to buy into it. Now, power is generally a very political issue. So in most countries, when you are about to have an election, or you have an election in a year or two, it's very difficult for you to push for cost-reflective tariffs, because it actually means that people end up paying more for the power. So it's the right balance between public and private sector requirements.
And that political thing is not just, that's just global, right? We've got the same thing in the UK, when Ed Miliband made some statements about the energy sector, and that causes issues, so you can't, I accept that. I mean, if we again look at, so where are some of the countries where you have invested, and what have been your experiences on that side?
At the moment, we only have assets in Zambia and Nigeria, right. And we're looking to other countries such as Namibia, where we are developing projects. But
so you're already developing projects in Namibia?
That's
right,
correct.
Right.
We're co-developers with NamPower on one of the assets. So if you look at it all, I think the countries are striving hard to try and move from where they were. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it also, the power deficits are quite huge across Africa. There are very, very few countries where you actually find surplus power. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, I think the problems that the continent is in has sort of forced everyone to look ahead and try and see how this thing can work.
So where is the, if we take a bigger scale now in our discussion and we say, right, okay, where is the solution to, again, solving the power needs? Because some people have already sort of talked to us about the fact that actually some of it lies in the transmission infrastructure to have interconnectors between countries where there is maybe a lot of hydro compared to, coal or whatever it is. I mean, what are your thinkings on that?
Yeah, we've looked at a number of countries, and I think that each country is quite unique. Most of the countries, they actually lack everything. So they don't have the transmission infrastructure, they don't have the generation capacity, and then they don't have the distribution. So there are very few countries
which... So where do you start? What do you build first?
To be honest, it's a chicken and egg.
Right.
There's no right answer. You might build a generation plant, but if you don't have the evacuation, it's infrastructure. It means that you can't supply. In Sierra Leone, we're building a 128 megawatt plant, and to do that, we actually need to make investments in the transmission and distribution sectors. So we're partnering with the government to make sure that all these investments are being made at the same time, so that there's no stranded asset by the time we're commissioning.
So one of the things that is surprising to me is, especially in a forum like this, where a lot of people talk about power projects, but there seems to be less talk about the distribution infrastructure to deal with those power projects, because you can have what I call high ramp power, so that is one thing. Then you have intermittent power, and then you've got baseload power, and all of those need the grid to have a different DNA. Why is there this lack of focus on the distribution sector? Is it because it's boring and it's just engineering, or why is the money not coming into that?
That's an interesting question. Our business is purely transmission distribution. That's where we're coming from. And we believe that you need the transmission and distribution for you to actually generate the power. Now, the biggest problem we've had generally is that distribution and transmission are normally public held assets. Because once you build, you don't expect another guy to come and replicate. Whereas generation, you can have a number of IPPs. Now, because of that, most governments don't want to let go. And also, they are advised by the donors to keep the core assets, transmission infrastructure specifically, to themselves, so that public funds can be used to invest in that. The biggest issue that we have, if you start bringing in private funding in areas like transmission, in the absence of a robust framework which allows a split between public and sector funding and how you earn your return, is that either the private investors will end up ripping off because they might earn a return on the public funds.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. And it's also because that you want to put that investment in and it's going to last 50 years, and you're talking along those time scales, and then we go back to the political side of things. Is like, do I want to be the government that's spending all this cash?
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct.
So where we need to get to is someone needs to kind of fill this conundrum and have the equivalent of an IPP type thing for the transmission sector.
No, that's correct. If you look at Nigeria, I'll mention Nigeria because we're in that sector. I think what they've done is split up the entire industry. So we've got the generators, the transmission, and the distribution, and then identify the gaps that needs to be built, so investments in each of these sectors. And the government understands that their obligation starts and ends on the transmission infrastructure because they retain that asset, whereas the private sector have to invest in the distribution and generation areas. I think it will probably come out right,
yes,
because they've sort of split and everyone knows whether they should be making the
investments. And there's this
investments.
commitment and understanding as well that if I put a, whacking great big gas-fired plant here, I need to be able to take that output and shift it.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So as we come to the end of our time here, and you're going around AEF and so on. What are some of the hopes of? And this is bringing it back to the conference. What are some of your hopes of in terms of the connections you'd like to make while you're here and so on?
I think it's always useful to come to the AEF because we always meet new developers and share ideas, and also new financiers. Each and every other year that goes by, you find that there's a new stream of funding which you can tap in, whether it's development finance or the long-term senior debt or project finance. It's also just good to see who else is here, who we can potentially partner with in other regions where they're looking
exactly.
at. So
they might provide you the gateway to get into new markets and so on.
That's correct.
But, listen, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for sharing your thoughts as well. And thank you as well for watching AEF TV in association with Engerati. And I hope you watch some of the other interviews that are coming up from AEF this year. Thank you.